So, Phil, we had Matt in for a running assessment.
Yep.
Matt had to pull out of a race recently, a big race, long distance race that he'd been training for, with only like 2 weeks to go.
Yeah.
Which was obviously disappointing for him.
Yeah.
When you go into the session like that, how do you, and someone's kind of just come from that process, like where do you start when it comes to finding out where they're at right now?
Yeah, I think what's important to say is he was training to run 250 miles. So I think the first things that start to go through your head is he's got a lot of volume in him, and as we all know, a lot of volume comes a lot of wear and tear and a lot of pressure on the joints. So the first thing I think of is training program. Don't necessarily think biomechanical faults or training faults. I start to think, let's push him and see has he progressed too quickly in his training? Has he run too many Ks too quickly? Has he been
too quickly as in increasing volume?
As increasing volume.
Speed?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for someone who wants to run 250 miles, that's a 2, 3, 4 year training process to be ready for that. And if somebody's coming, he's an ex-sprinter or a football player and has trained up for it inside 6 months, well then, it's probably just a programming issue, which wouldn't necessarily need biomechanical adjustments. So the first thing I'm thinking is let's try and dig into this guy and let's hear what his endurance background was, or is.
Yeah. So he actually came with a scan because he got scanned fairly well within the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So he had some information there about what was going on in the knee.
Mm.
When you go into that process, have you got that information? Like, does that affect your thought process in a sense of like, is it something you then become more concerned about, or is it something that...
I try not to let it. Of course, you take the information incredibly seriously. You get. You're very fortunate to be able to get a picture of what's going on in the knee and be able to see the information. But at the same time, you have to understand that the information is still there for a reason. And again, going back to my previous point, is if this is just overuse, if this is just because I've gone too quickly too soon, and the diagnosis is quite easy, let's give him a good training program. But if it's not that, and it wasn't in this case, I mean, he's rowed across the Atlantic, he's got some serious endurance genes in him and has done a lot of endurance events before and has some experience, so he's not built up too quickly. So then we're thinking this must be some kind of biomechanical fault. So yes, we understand there's inflammation. Yes, we understand that there are problems within the knee and there's pathology within the knee, but there's a reason for that. There must be something that's causing that. I think a body that, as a lot of people prove, a body that is biomechanically correct and working doesn't get injured. You can put it through a lot. I know myself, I've run, as you know, I've run a lot and seen a lot and trained a lot of athletes that have done a lot of things where they don't get injured. So there you need to start digging into the biomechanical faults. Why suddenly does this come when he can run and work in row the Atlantic, run all these long distance events, and then suddenly something comes? What is it that's changed? What is it that's new? And how do his mechanics look?
So speaking of the mechanics then, so going into that as my next question is, his issue comes with running, because he said he's been fine, been able to row even in training, and that's caused no problem for him. And it literally is run specific mechanics. Yeah. The guys will see on the assessment who didn't really actually get to running. Where was your start point? Because you didn't ask, oh well, let me see you run.
No.
Why did you start? Well, where did you start, and why did you start there?
And I would usually look at them run. The first thing is we didn't have a treadmill here or anything else like that to sort of do a slow motion analysis or a film analysis, which we would typically do. But in any case, with Matt, it wasn't necessary. It wasn't a necessity to do that, because already you can see he's got some of the classic symptoms of runners. He has what we call a patellofemoral problem, a lateral patellofemoral problem, which is very typical for runners. It's very typical for runners who run long distances, and it's very typical for runners who run slowly, actually. It's quite interesting that runners who run slowly in lots of distances, they tend to have a little bit more of it's almost like a land and explode, where you look at the sprinters or the fast runners, they have that very sort of light contact and they don't bend the knee, they don't get quite as much knee flexion as the slower runners. So it's quite a common It's quite a common issue. So there I just wanted to test him in a little bit of those ranges. I mean, in running, you're never really going past that 30 degrees anyway. So I'm never going to push him further than there. And just seeing just putting him in some different environments and seeing if I can bring the pain on or replicate the pain somehow.
So that's what we call then the micro load. You were keeping him within the angles specific to running there.
Absolutely.
Because it was a lot shallower than
a normal squat would be.
The normal squat. Obviously, the environment I work in with squatting and lunging, you were in that upper end range. So that was specifically to be specific towards running in the angles there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from those tests, then what did you see within that environment? Like you said, it's a common pattern, but what did you notice within that?
Well, I mean, typically with lateral patellofemoral pain, you're looking at a disparity between the rotations of the tibia and the femur. So what you'll tend to have is that one goes too far in the rotation, and it's not necessarily a sagittal plane issue, it's not necessarily a flexion extension issue.
It's not a patella issue, because people believe that the patella, it's common that it's the patella getting pulled.
Well, it's not the patella. No, the patella isn't getting pulled. It's actually yeah, I suppose it is getting pulled, but it's to the extent that that's floating, if you like, that's in space. It's only being held in by tendinous attachments. So that's floating out here, and what you're actually getting is you're getting some kind of rotation or disparity in the rotation between the femur and the speed of the patella. So those two, either are muscles holding this down, which would what we'd call the tracking, or this is moving too fast or not moving fast enough, and the rotation, or this is going this way very quickly, or this is going this way quicker, and the disparity between the speeds in rotation of the two bones will then create that what we call crashing or banging or rubbing, and that's where the inflammation or the lateral patellofemoral pain will come from.
So it could be not just that tight muscle pulling the patella, it could actually be a bone speed thing.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if the tibia, if the foot, if we have a sort of a dropped foot and a flat foot, and the tibia is moving very fast this way, of course the patella tendon, which encases the patella, is here, and so if that's rotating quickly that way and this is too stiff to follow, you'll automatically, there you'd usually get medial patellofemoral problems if it was that, but it's just a classic example of where that would actually be pulling then the patella into the femur on the medial side, and you'll have what's called a closing of the medial patellofemoral joint.
So from that 30 degrees micro loading, like where did you take that to then? Where was your next stage? Where were you testing from there?
Yeah, well, I saw a couple of things in his assessment there. The first I saw was as he was doing his squats, this foot was just was really trying to rotate outwards, and by the end of his just 5 or 6 repetitions he was almost sort of facing that way. So I started to think, what muscles are there in the body that would pull the foot outwards? And there you look at sort of posterior tibialis as a classic example. You would perhaps look at the adductor group, could do it but probably not, and then you're looking at the glutes, your hip and the lateral hip and the posterior hip, and did a quick lateral hip test and found out they worked really well. Just got them into some loads, some gentle loads, and glute min, glute medius, they worked how we'd like them to work. So then you start to look at some other culprits, and so my strategy from there was I want to go in and have a look at posterior tibialis. I want to go in and have a look at glute max. I want to go and have a look at piriformis and see if any of these are our culprit, which are, again, having one end that's flexible and one end that's stiff will cause a problem, and vice versa, or having two ends that are stiff. And again, just seeing if we get those bones spinning at equal speeds.
So you then went into more specific muscular testing from a range of motion point of view, like so you mentioned tightness or stiffness or looseness there. So where did you go, or why did you take the next step there, having noticed that foot turn out in the squat? Like, did you then take that to stretch flexibility testing, or did you take it, where did you take it from there?
I tried to take it to an integrated stretching movement. So I wanted to put him in a position where both of those muscles were under load at the same time and see what compensation we got. So there I had him just try to replicate the loading of the running motion, so that motion there, and just got him stepping up onto a box. Yeah, exactly. And just got him stepping up onto a box here, and having that foot in that position here, and then having that hip load, and try and get him under here. So just seeing, I've got the sort of glutes and the lateral hip under load, and I've got the foot under load. And what we saw was that the foot landed here every time, and then correct that foot, and that landed flat. And then when we corrected the flat, we saw the hip kick out. And then you say, okay, I'm pretty much on the right track here. I can see that, you know, I've stopped the posterior tibialis conversation, and I got the hip conversation. So we've got the two of them working in tandem. So simply the next test would be, let's stretch them, as you alluded to. Let's actually stretch them now in isolation and go back to it, and just see if we get any kind of improvement.
This was for you. This was like, this guy is stiff. He's run a lot of Ks. Muscles have got stiff, tight, overused, and that's been the...
I called him a sand runner. I mean, these are two symptoms you classically see from people that start running on the beach. A lot of people go on holiday, and they're runners, they go on holiday and they start to do sort of, you know, it's quite good fun to go and have a run on the beach, and then they get these symptoms. So they're what we call sand symptoms. So pretty much, jumped in and said to him, you know, asked him a question, have you been doing different terrain? Yeah, he's been doing off-road and changing his terrain up. Maybe it's a new pair of shoes, but these are quite classic changing environment symptoms for someone that the posterior tibialis works hard to stabilise the midfoot, and then the glutes work hard to stabilise heel running, and it just happens he's been running a lot of trails and a lot of hills, so almost certainly that's where it comes from.
So what, for runners out there and change of, or people obviously in the running world, we're recommended to run on treadmills over hard surfaces, like that change to that soft surface of the trail, like why does that create those problems? You're calling it a sand runner. A sand runner issue. Like what is so different about the sand? Obviously softer impact, but why does that affect those muscles so much?
It pretty much comes down to ground contact time. When we have this hard, nice surface like the floor or a treadmill that's flicking the foot up for us or rebounding the foot, you've got that kinetic energy, you've got the kinetic sort of load energy in the musculature, which then allows us to explode. When you hit the sand, you sort of lose all that energy into the sand. You sink down, so you then need to produce that energy yourself. And to produce that energy, you need to hit the sand. You need to go deep. You then need to find some kind of stable base. Then you need to find the load. Then you need to push off. So you have that ground contact time, which is 300-400% of that of on a treadmill or on the road. So when you're doing that, you're much more conscious over your contractions. When you're running on sand, you can almost think about contracting your legs. You're contracting the muscles as you're running, where when you're on a treadmill and it's going quickly, you don't think about it so much, and you'll feel that sort of land and almost that slide and that rotation of your leg on sand. So pretty much that's where it comes from. It's almost running on wobble balls or running on Bosu balls or running on, you know, it's one of the main reasons that we try to avoid doing any kind of totally unstable surface training for runners, because it just causes them so many problems.
So that's the big cause of the problem, and you've said that it's a tightness thing. So how does that then develop into the program? What's the direction of his process back into running? Because he's been off running now for around a month, and he's not run at all.
No.
Because he still gets symptoms just walking up hills and downstairs and things like that. What's his process from these tightnesses that you say need to be stretched? What does the program look like in this initial phase?
Well, I think the first thing is you never do with a runner is you never stop them running. You know, so I said to him he can run 3-4 kilometres easy, and I think there's a big issue is that we have this, you know, you go from running 70, 80, 90, in some cases 100 kilometres a week, and then told you just can't run. That in itself gives enough stiffness, enough problems that it's almost dangerous. So you never stop a runner running. It's got to be a really serious pathology before I'll stop someone running, but of course it's got to be done with some moderate care. So the first thing is get him running again, and I gave him 3 to 5 kilometres 3-4 times a week at, for him, a very, very comfortable pace of 5:30 per 5 minutes 30 per kilometre. And then from there, his homework and his training is every day is learning to run again. So it's replicating pretty much what we want him to do perfectly. So just as much as he's learnt a bad pattern to create these dysfunctions, we need to teach him a good pattern to to learn them to do it correctly again. So it's really putting him in that box position there where he's coming up and he's landing correctly, he's having the foot in the right position, intermittent with some, so that's what we call our micro loading. Taking it from the micro loading to sort of micro loading those good positions into some form of balance to sort of teach the control, sort of stimulate the nervous system into some kind of lunging. Here what I've chosen to do is start the whole process with a release stretch so the muscles allow the motion we want, because at the moment he's doing that exercise unable to get into the position I'd like him to because he's so stiff. So it starts with a release work, stretch, to a micro load, to a balance, to a lunge, to his sport basically, and it's just working gradually through that process, getting him back to sport.
And he already reported within the session that was great that the knee pain had shifted from the lateral side to the medial side, and he was starting to get that glute. The pain was moving from the anterior hip around into the glute med, glute min area, which was great for him already. So he's already a step on the right track, which is cool. A long way to go. Like where do you, like you said, you've got this goal for him within his gym work. That's the thing with rehabilitation. Sometimes it can become, or what people perceive as rehabilitation, it's nowhere near the sport. So like in terms of that programming, like you've got him in this micro loading, quite a very controlled environment that doesn't quite look like running. Like where does that process go to?
I think that's the thing is I would hate to be or I hate it for myself when you get asked the question, when is an athlete back? Because the Premier League footballers, the physios there, when are they back? When is expected back? I mean, it's impossible if you've got guidelines, but it's really an impossible question. And they're young, they're fit, they're dedicated, they do their homework, they do the stretching, they do their exercises, so that of course goes a lot quicker. My goal for him would be to do some very specific run drills, almost to the point where I treat him like a sprinter. One thing sprinters have to do is run with perfect technique. Of course, a sprinting technique is very different to a long endurance technique, and it should be. So not entirely the same, but almost have that sprinter's discipline in their running style. And so they pretty much, what we tend to find is they get a really good aerobic boost from it, because it's quite anaerobic, the work the sprinters do. It's quite power based and quite sprint based, and it works very much on position. So pretty much to get him going again, I'd put him through some kind of sprinters program, a reduced sprinters program, just to get the technique and get his body awareness as well while he's running is quite relevant with the sprinters program. And then from there, just gradually build up the kilometres again with good mechanics. It's always interesting to film them after sort of 20-25 k's of running versus the first k of running, and that's where you'll get your answer. Really, is get them on the same stretch, the same bit of road, and just sort of film them at different stages, and just see what how much the movement quality breaks down, and that gives you your answer usually.
So what was it that you could see from the assessment that you did relating that to running? Like what were you finding with those, that toe turning out and that hip not working well? What mechanic was that creating within his body during running that caused the pain?
Well, the great question. For me, the lateral thing is if I just face the camera so the guys can see there, is you've got the heel being pulled this way. So you've got that as he lifts off, he just does an instant whip that way. So he was even in his lunges. And even in his lunges, he was landing like this. So coming in that position there, and then having the knee falling into this way. And now a lot of people here will say that's the knee valgus that causes the problem. It's not the abduction. It's not that problem. It's the rotation. It's the fact that when we're in this position here, you can see how that's internally rotated versus how far this is externally rotated, and it's that disparity that actually causes the lateral patella to crash down onto the femur here. Right. So it's actually the landing here, and the inability of basically it's the foot pointing out, but it's the inability of the femur to go with the knee because it's blocked.
What we also saw was the knee shooting forward as well.
We did, yeah. Well, that was again a hamstring and a gluteal tightness just causes what we call a posterior tilt, so that the hips are in this position, which just means when he hits that same position here, you just see that sort of shoot forward of the knee. It's quite a common thing in runners that you just see a sort of 3 millimeter sort of boom, glide forward of the knee. Yeah. And of course,
that uncontrolled glide.
It's an uncontrolled glide, yeah. Of course, when you land, you want the knee
travelling forward isn't a bad thing. It's there's no control there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny. You see the land, and then you see this sort of nice glide, and then just at the end, you see a dunk. It's sort of like a twitch almost, and that twitch there is exactly what if you imagine you've already got a sort of very closed, very pressured lateral capsule there, and the two are very close to each other, and then you just get this little twitch at the end and this bang in there in the running style. It very quickly inflames and gives the symptoms that Matt's been seeing. So the hip work was to stop the little shoot forward of the knee, and the calf work is to stop the sort of foot landing facing outwards, and correcting those two. I'm confident he'll be fine soon.
Well, it was great to get your thoughts from the session right there, your experience with working within the endurance field, and your experience with running and picking up on your eye for what you're looking at. It's been a great session.
It's good fun, eh?
Always.